Hi, beautiful family. This is kind of more of a black screen sharing because that's just sometimes what I'm able to do. And I don't want to miss the opportunity to share something that's powerful. I had my first real like traditional family Thanksgiving. I want to say what I consider a real one, in decades. Um, I was living in Hawaii, and so I wasn't really close to my family, and took a lot more to visit. But also, just I guess the main reason why I'm wanting to share today is that I was able to see myself handling some very difficult situations, just with a lot more ease and confidence and groundedness. And I wanted to share about that because I was sharing it with some friends today and realized, wow, like they were amazed that I was able to pull that off. And I guess I kind of am too, because so many families, and I certainly was in this category for years, where, it got so bad that I just couldn't really engage with my family. And so, I kind of felt like an orphan, like I was just out here on my own with no family. And I have a small family as it is. So, there were just three kids and my parents, and I was the oldest. And so when you don't even have them, it's sort of like, it's a hard path. But I just was, so affected by some of the patterns that I just couldn't be around it. And for some reason, I felt led to connect like it was time, and I was able to see, myself hold and see the dysfunction, but not be so shattered by it or so triggered by it or ruffled by it, like, usually we can get. And so it can be done. I wanted to share some details around that to give you hope and just to give you a version of, how it showed up for me, because, I think I feel like, we get our certain family members for a reason, that we chose those dynamics because it was part of our evolution as a soul to go through this experience. And gosh, we're at a stage in the timeline where most of us have had quite a bit of trauma, abuse, dysfunction, whatever you want to call it, to almost to the point where it's like the new norm, because we have been through so much, and we're amazingly strong beings who are capable of way more than we even can imagine as we're awakening. And I just want to affirm you right now, because this isn't easy stuff. I've had to educate myself quite a bit around concepts like narcissism, gaslighting, and, feeling invalidated, not being seen or heard, being fed a reality that they wanted me to believe, and then realizing that's not my reality, and having to really stand up for myself and have my voice. And thank God I am smart enough to figure this stuff out pretty quickly. YouTube has been a great thing, because all I have to do is look up these things and, can get a whole teaching about them. And I also am very deeply spiritual and have I feel like I've always had a strong identity, so I'm not easily shaken. I was that kid who, you know, that poor Christian girl who went to this ritzy college prep high school on scholarship and would stand up for what I believed in, and for what I felt was true, even though maybe most of them didn't have that perspective, because, I had a very spiritual perspective. And I was able to do the same in this situation. So some of you will relate to this. So, I arrived late one night, get picked up from the airport. The very next morning, my brother lights into me about not being the kind of Christian he thinks I should be. And this is granted a younger brother. And anyway, this is what happened to me last time I visited family, and someone else in the family lit into me the very first morning. And it's like, really? Uh, anyway, I can handle it. I know that I was kind of prepared that he might do that again. And, we didn't grow up fundamentalist, but for some reason, he and my dad have decided to be fundamentalist Christians, which is honestly more like being a Pharisee, in my opinion, at least the version that they're depicting. But, we battled it out for a couple hours, and I'm not really ruffled by it. He was really more ruffled by it, I think, because I know the truth. I know I've been there, done that. It doesn't work to be like that, and it's not effective, and it doesn't attract people to want to be Christians. I don't know anybody who'd want to be a Pharisee unless they were pretty dysfunctional. So at any rate, I went through that. And, it's kind of upsetting on a human level because I was being harassed, basically. And, he's even gone as far as to say things like, you're not one of us, you're not a true Christian, you undermine the whole message of Christianity, blah, blah, blah. And none of that is true. But in his mind, he has it set that that's reality. And yet I was the one who was the missionary to Russia. I was the one who went to a Christian college. I was the one who got up at the crack of dawn to do my Christian devotions, read the Bible before anything else in the day. But for some reason, he and my dad need to believe that I'm somehow out there. So anyway, my human self, doesn't like it so much, but my soul is very capable of handling it. But unfortunately, that night I had a nightmare of a man repeatedly harassing me to the point where I had to call the police because he kept showing up and badgering me. And, that was just kind of what came out of how I felt in that situation. At any rate, I was able to get past that. And then, there is some dynamics in my family where some gaslighting happens as well. I guess at this point, I probably could be considered the black sheep in the family, because the black sheep is the one that sees through the BS and calls it out, and nobody likes it. But, we have to do it because we're strong enough to do it and say, hey, you guys, there's a better way to do this. There's a healthier way of doing this, and they usually don't want to hear it. But at any rate, that's the role I seem to play in my family, because as soon as I woke up to the truth about, some of these patterns I was seeing, I shared it with the family, and, a lot of times they're kind of resistant to it. At any rate, gaslighting is something that happens out there, and so is narcissism, more than I'd like to admit. And so the way that shows up, and what I mean by that is, so gaslighting, what that means is if you're sharing something, it might be you're sharing what you think about something or your feelings about something, and the person completely invalidates you, doesn't validate your feelings or your thoughts, and basically tells you how it is instead. So this happened, I guess, with that same brother again, where we were talking about my dad, and I was sharing my experience of dad, and he's like, no, dad is this and dad is that, and that didn't happen, and our childhood was pretty good, and it was da-da-da. And I'm like, no, that is not my experience of dad. That's your experience of dad. I had a completely different experience, and I basically didn't get to have a relationship with my dad because he was not available for that. He was all about my brother. And so that's what he spent his time doing, is, investing in my brother. But that's an example, for instance. But anytime someone is basically trying to feed you a reality that's, is not your truth or not your reality or not your experience of what happened, that's gaslighting. And so you really have to stand up to it, and be like, no, actually, this was my experience. Are you going to hear me, or are you going to deny that I had this experience? Is kind of what you end up saying in a way. So, there's a lot of that. So I'm bombarded, kind of like, sometimes, like, no matter what I share, it's, in this family, it's like somehow they go into denial. They don't want to admit that that's happened, or that that's the truth, or that's been my experience, and they just don't really want to look at it. And they try to tell me that everything's fine, and they just, kind of rationalize what happened away, or, there's many different ways that they do it. They can argue with me about it, basically tell me I'm wrong, try to make light of it, instead of the healthy thing, which is, wow, like, if someone is speaking their truth about what happened or about their feelings, you want to validate them, and and at least mirror back what you heard and say, so you're saying this, that was your experience. And then you might have questions, or you might find that fascinating, or maybe you do disagree with them. But at any rate, when you're disagreeing or invalidating someone every time, that is a characteristic of narcissism. So, it is what it is. That feels like a scary word, even to me, but there are these characteristics that sometimes get embedded in us when we've undergone severe abuse and trauma. And I noticed myself doing it right back, sort of like subconsciously, almost as a way to say, like, put up a mirror and say, see what you're doing to me every time. Do you like it? No, you don't. You get frustrated too, so don't do it to me. But the only thing is they're not catching that message, so it's not effective. So I basically said, and this is another victory, with one of the members of my family, I said, hey, let's do this differently. There's this pattern where there's this, cycle of invalidating each other instead of being supportive of one another, and at least mirroring back what we heard to make sure we heard it right, which at least helps that person feel heard, if anything else. Even if you do disagree with maybe the content of it or whatever. Or you might have a different perspective, which is fine as long as you're not doing that constantly to the person. Because then you don't want to be around them anymore. And it's like, I don't really get seen or heard here. Why even hang around these people? So I said, let's break this cycle. This is generational. This is trauma that they got through their upbringing, and it's being passed on. And we can change it and break it, and it doesn't have to be that hard. I said, let's just get in the habit of like mirroring back what we think we heard, so that at least the other person feels heard. And then we can take it from there. And then we can call it out if we're doing any of these other patterns of disagreeing, making wrong, blaming, criticizing, all those things that kind of aren't fun to have a conversation with someone who's doing that all the time to us. So, it's kind of like a pact to be supportive of one another and hear each other out. And, we can discuss it, because oftentimes people do have very different perspectives on a topic or subject, or even an experience where we were all there, but we experienced it all differently. And, but at least we can improve the situation instead of this cycle that I noticed was happening, and it was making me like feel like I couldn't even have a relationship with the person or didn't really want to be around them because it's just so negative. And no one wants to feel like they're not being seen and heard. So anyway, that's the progress, because it takes some consciousness to actually figure it out enough to actually voice it to the family member as to, hey, let's do this. And then have them say, okay, well, let's give it a try. I know I had to kind of observe it for a while before I could figure out, and sort of unravel what was happening. All I knew at first was just I felt like crap after I talked to them. And I would get off the phone with one of them or come away from a visit with one of them and just be like, ew, that didn't feel good. And I notice I don't really enjoy being around that person. But it kind of took me getting educated and learning about these things so that I could catch it and sort of track what was happening in our conversations, to the point where at one point I said, on one of the trips, I said, I notice every time that I'm sharing my feelings or my thoughts that you're in disagreement, and I am either challenged, or you want to change how I feel or think, or you criticize me for it, or you invalidate me for it, you make light of it, whatever. But I'm just never really getting any support or empathy. And this person kind of threw a fit at that time when I said that. And then I kind of, in my mind, threw up my hands and was like, I guess I can't have a relationship with you then, because I'm not willing to continue this cycle. And there was a long distancing, COVID happened and we were texting, but that was it, because it seemed to go downhill if we were in person or even on the phone. I noticed it too. So anyway, a lot of this stuff is subconscious. Even narcissistic behavior, a lot of them are not aware that they're doing it because it was done to them and it's just normal to them. And then there are some narcissists who know exactly what they're doing out there, and that's scary. But I think a lot of us, often are a victim in a way to a narcissistic caretaker. It could be, mom or dad or both, or a grandmother or whatever, grandfather, uncle, whoever raised us. And we don't really know that we're doing it, but it's just this pattern that gets ingrained in us then, and then we start doing it to people unknowingly. And we can start doing it to our partners, and then it's just not a good cycle or pattern to have. So I'm hoping that if you notice these things in yourself or in people close to you, that you can start tracking it as well, noticing it happening, and be able to, say something like, gosh, it just would have been nice to feel like maybe if you had some empathy for my situation, because this is painful for me. And I don't feel like you have really any empathy for what I'm going through. That's one way of saying it, right? And, or asking, is it possible for you to repeat back what you heard me say so that I know that you heard me? Or is it possible to get some support around this? Because I'm just feeling criticized right now instead, and that's not really helping me right now. Those are some examples. So anyway, I just wanted to share that this has been a full circle of, lifetime of, I'm in my 50s, and we're finally coming around where I can just even be in that environment and be strong enough to handle it. And speak to it and try to help it along, because um, I think, with the exception of my younger brother, who I don't think has these issues as much because he came 10 years later, the others, in the family don't seem to be privy to this or notice it enough to stop those patterns. So I'm the one that kind of has to bring it up and share, hey, we could do this better, and we could do it differently. And I know that that's going to be happening a lot as we are awakening as people on this planet, and families can start to heal. And, it all starts with one of them waking up to it and saying something and having enough communication skills to say it in a way that it can be heard, because typically we come up against resistance from the others who don't want to change or don't want to see it. But I know that this is going to be a theme that a lot of families are going to be having: resolution and forgiveness and more understanding, and be able to have better communication patterns with each other, being more supportive and effective with each other, because we're awakening into better ways of doing things. So hallelujah for that. I invoke and activate that happens all across the planet with ease and peace and relief and joy, so that we can get on to some better relationship skills with each other and, have more connection and more intimacy and all the things that we want in our relationships. So anyway, I just had to share that today, because I kind of wondered if that was ever going to happen in my lifetime. And I feel like, wow, that was definitely a victory for me to be able to go through that and actually come out feeling good about the trip there, and being able to, just see all this and not get so bothered by it that I'd have to leave or just be frustrated or whatever. So may you find that you are growing as well in your relationships, so that you're able to share similar victories around breakthroughs that you're having in your core relationships.